Imagine living with unshakable peace, where nothing and no one has the power to disturb you, where criticism, defenses, and problems no longer steal your calm. Sounds impossible, right? But the Stoics achieved it. While the world reacted with anger and frustration, they maintained serenity. Not because they didn't feel emotions, but because they had learned to master them. Today I'm going to reveal how you can do the same. It not only harms those around us, but also corrodes us from within, weakening our mind and dragging us towards decisions we will sooner or later regret. The Stoics considered one of the greatest threats to virtue, because when anger takes control, we cease to be rational and become slaves to our impulses. It is not a sign of strength, but of weakness, proof that we have lost self. If someone insults us, it is not the insult that harms us, but the importance we give it. If we observe ourselves carefully, we will see that most of our angry reactions are disproportionate and illogical. Marcus Aurelius recommended remembering that life is short and that most of the problems that infuriate us are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Seneca suggested practicing patience and indifference to provocations. True strength is not in responding with violence, frustration, anger, sadness, resentment. All these feelings have a common root, the difference between reality and our expectations. We believe we deserve certain treatments, certain successes, certain clear paths, but the world doesn't follow our rules. They have built an expectation based on their own vision of what is right. But if betrayal occurs, anger doesn't arise from the act itself, but from the contrast with the idealized image they had created. We can strive to achieve something, but without clinging to the idea that it must happen exactly as we want. Otherwise, failure will destroy us. Disappointment doesn't come from life, but from our resistance to accepting its unexpected twists. When we feel that someone disrespects us, treats us unfairly, or doesn't recognize our worth, we react with anger because our sense of identity feels threatened. What if their words have nothing to do with us, but with their own internal chaos? If someone insults us, the insult itself has no power until we give it meaning. We can choose to ignore it. We can see it as a reflection of the other person and move on without it affecting our peace. But the ego wants to fight. It wants to defend itself. It wants to prove it's right. And in that desire to defend our image, we fall into the trap of anger, losing control, and acting impulsively. We cling to resentment because we believe that by doing so we punish those who have harmed us. But in reality, the only one punished is ourselves. Anger consumes our peace, traps us in a mental prison, and prevents us from moving forward. Forgiveness, on the other hand, is the key that opens that cell. It doesn't mean justifying what was done to us or naively forgetting, but freeing ourselves from the need to continue suffering for something that has already passed. If someone offends us, it is not the offense itself that hurts us, but the importance we give it. By forgiving, we stop feeding that importance. We understand that each person acts from their own level of consciousness and that their behavior is a reflection of their inner world, not ours. It does not mean allowing abuse or tolerating injustice, but learning to let go of the resentment that prevents us from living in peace. When we forgive, we do not free the other person. We free ourselves. We stop dragging an unnecessary weight. We stop spending energy on a conflict that only exists in our minds. True revenge is not in harming, but in demonstrating that the harm has not changed us, that we move forward without anger consuming us. Peace is not found in waiting for others to repent, but in deciding that our happiness does not depend on their behavior. Forgiveness is letting go of the poison of anger and embracing the freedom that comes with serenity. To forgive is not a gift to the other person. It is an act of self-love, an essential step to regain our tranquility. But if someone's insult doesn't change who we are, if their attitude doesn't define us, why allow it to drag us into a state of uncontrolled emotion? Our mind becomes a battlefield where the past remains present, where we continue to give power to those who hurt us. But the reality is the opposite. Strength lies in whoever has control over their emotions, in whoever decides to let go of what hurts them instead of clinging to it. Seneca taught that we should not allow anger to dictate our actions, because when we act with anger, we are not masters of ourselves. If someone hurts us and we respond with resentment, we are giving them power over our peace. But if, instead, we choose to forgive, we regain control of our mind and our will. But why carry that anger? Marcus Aurelius said that the best punishment for someone who has harmed us is not to be like them. If someone betrayed us, offended us, or hurt us, continuing to feel resentment only prolongs the control that person has over us. Forgiving, on the other hand, gives us back our power, allows us to let go of the weight, and move forward without the past defining us. The reality is that most of the time, others' actions are not a reflection of us, but of themselves. The ego tells us it's disrespectful, that we should react, that we can't let them treat us that way. The natural reaction is anger, disappointment, the desire for revenge. But how long can that feeling be sustained without becoming a burden? Resentment does not affect the betrayer, it affects the one who carries it. Every time the betrayal is thought of, the pain is real. On the other hand, if they decide to forgive, if they accept that what happened can no longer be changed and that the past should not define their present, they find freedom. It's not about trusting the betrayer again, but but about no longer allowing their action to continue affecting us. Forgiveness is a conscious choice. It doesn't happen overnight and it's not always easy, but it is the path to inner peace. But the other driver wasn't thinking about us. They didn't plan to offend us. They're simply caught up in their own world. However, our ego turns the situation into something personal, and with that, anger takes over our mind. If instead of reacting, we simply accept that everyone has their own problems, anger has no place. The same applies in any other context. At work, in relationships, in daily arguments, our reaction is not caused by the events themselves, but by the story we tell ourselves about them. However, the ego makes us believe that everything revolves around us. If we improve our self-esteem, if we stop needing validation from others, if we understand that our worth does not depend on how we are treated, we can be immune to provocations. Seneca said that the best revenge is not to be like the one who has harmed us. If someone treats us badly and we respond with anger, we are letting them control us. But if instead we remain calm, if we decide not to enter their game, we demonstrate true strength. Anger is a reflection of an ego that has not yet learned to detach from others' opinions. But when we understand that others do not have the power to define us, that their words and actions say more about them than about us, we are freed. It's not about allowing abuse or accepting everything in silence, but about learning to react with intelligence and not from emotion. Inner peace is not achieved by controlling others, but by controlling our reaction to them. When the ego ceases to be the center of our existence, anger loses its dominion over us. We tell ourselves, "They disrespected me. They made me look bad. They didn't value me." But what would happen if we simply stopped seeing ourselves as the center of every situation? If we understood that others' behavior is their burden, not ours, we could free ourselves from anger. We believe we deserve different treatment, that others should see us as we see ourselves, and when that doesn't happen, we feel that something sacred within us has been violated. But the truth is that anger doesn't arise from what others do, but from our interpretation of their actions. It's our ego that demands recognition, that gets offended, that needs to defend its image. If that ego weren't so inflated, if we didn't take things so personally, anger would lose its power over us. A Stoic understands that everything changes, that nothing is guaranteed, and therefore does not allow their emotions to be dictated by external factors. If we eliminate rigid expectations, we stop demanding that the world adapt to our beliefs. Instead of getting frustrated when something goes wrong, we ask ourselves what we can learn. Instead of feeling betrayed, we understand that people act according to their own nature, not the one we imagine for them. Peace is found in flexibility, in the ability to accept what comes without resistance. Happiness is not about making everything fit our expectations, but about learning to flow with reality without it robbing us of our tranquility. Instead of accepting reality as it is, they fight against it in their mind, and that internal conflict turns into suffering. Another example is the person who expects their friends to always be there for them, for traffic to be fluid, for their boss to value their effort. But when something like this doesn't happen, they feel disappointment and anger because they assume the world should follow their rules. Frustration doesn't come from the event itself, but from the clash between what we desired and what actually happened. Seneca said that we suffer more in our imagination than in reality, because what hurts us most is not what happens, but our interpretation of it. If we'd learn to accept events without resistance, we could avoid much unnecessary pain. When we believe the world should behave in a certain way and it doesn't, we feel that we have been failed. But in reality, the failure is in us, in the distorted image we create in our minds. It's not about resignation, but about understanding that the world owes us nothing. We cannot control the behavior of others or external events, only our reaction to them. Epictetus said that we should accept what happens as if we had chosen it, because resisting only generates suffering. If we stop expecting people to treat us in a certain way, if we accept that they can fail us, that life does not follow a predictable order, we eliminate much of the stress and frustration. We cling to an illusion, and when reality destroys it, instead of adapting, we react with suffering. But in maintaining calm when everything around us seems to want to push us out of control, anger is an internal enemy, a beast that, if not tamed, can consume us. But the good news is that we can train ourselves not to be dragged by it. The next time you feel anger rising, stop. Ask yourself if it's really worth it. Remember that no external force has power over you unless you give it to them. Peace is not found in the absence of provocations, but in the ability to face them with equanimity and control. Imagine an argument with a loved one. In the heat of the moment, harsh words seem necessary, but once everything calms down, we realize that we could have handled the situation with more wisdom. Most problems can be resolved with dialogue and patience, but anger blinds our ability to reason. Instead of seeking solutions, we seek revenge and thereby only feed a cycle of resentment and pain. Learning to control our perception is the first step to mastering anger. When we let anger take over, our actions become irrational. In the moment, it seems justifiable to yell, insult, or even hit something. But when the storm passes, we realize that we have only worsened the situation. A fit of anger can destroy relationships that took years to build. An impulsive comment can leave wounds that never fully heal. If you apply these teachings, you will never get angry or upset with anyone again. Not because the world changes, but because you will have changed. Before you start, go to the comments and write, "Today my best version begins. I am Stoic." With this, you commit to taking control of your mind and living with discipline. Write it now and let's begin. 1. The destructive nature of anger. Anger is one of the most destructive emotions a human being can experience. Anger resembles an uncontrollable fire. It begins with a spark, perhaps a misinterpreted word, an action we consider unfair, or an unexpected obstacle. Science confirms what the Stoics already knew. Anger raises blood pressure, weakens the immune system, and can trigger cardiovascular problems. It is not just a momentary emotion. It is a poison that, if allowed to grow, destroys both body and mind. If we give it oxygen with ruminating thoughts, it quickly grows into a blaze that devastates our mental clarity, our relationships, and our will. Marcus Aurelius warned that the best way to combat anger is to prevent it from arising in the first place. If we learn to recognize its first signs, we can extinguish it before it consumes us completely. The consequences of anger are devastating. It not only causes unnecessary conflicts, but also affects our health. Epictetus taught that it is not external circumstances that disturb us, but our interpretation of them. Seneca said that anger is like a momentary delusion, a state in which we cease to be masters of our words and actions. The Stoics teach us that the best way to combat anger is through self-discipline and reflection. 2. All negative emotions arise from unmet expectations. Negative emotions don't arise from what happens, but from what we expected to happen and didn't. We get angry because people don't act as we want, because the results are not what we expected, because life doesn't follow the script we wrote in our minds. Imagine someone who believes their partner will never cheat on them, because that's how it should be. The Stoics teach us that the key to inner peace is to eliminate unrealistic expectations. Accepting reality as it is doesn't mean we shouldn't have goals or desires, but it does imply that we must be prepared for any outcome. 3. Anger is a reflection of the ego. Anger is nothing more than a reflection of a wounded ego. But what if that person is simply having a bad day? When someone speaks to us rudely, our first reaction is to think they're attacking us. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that it is not what happens that disturbs us, but our opinion about it. A clear example is when we're in traffic and someone cuts us off. The Stoics teach us that the key to controlling anger is to recognize the role our ego plays in it. 4. Forgiveness frees us from anger. Anger is a heavy burden that we often carry without realizing it. When we cling to anger, we relive the pain again and again. Resentment is a trap of the ego. It makes us believe that if we forgive, we are showing weakness. Imagine someone who has been betrayed by a close friend. Epictetus reminded us that we have no control over what others do, only over our reaction. 5. Practice non-reaction when something irritates us. When we feel provoked or attacked, the first reaction that arises is impulsive, charged with emotion. We want to respond immediately, we want to defend ourselves, we want to prove we are right, but at that moment, our mind is not operating from reason, but from instinct. And that's where we make mistakes, where we say things we later regret, where we worsen situations instead of resolving them. What seems like an unforgivable offense today will lose importance in a few days. You can let the emotion pass, you can observe it without being dragged by it. And when you do, you'll notice something incredible. Conflicts will decrease, anxiety will be reduced, and the people who used to provoke you will lose power over you. Non-reaction is the door to true freedom. The ability to decide how and when to respond without being a slave to external stimuli. What deeply irritates us now will seem insignificant in a few hours. I told myself it was due to others' lack of respect, but the truth was I wasn't angry with them. I was angry with myself. In essence, it's not the external world, but the way we perceive it. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that if something external disturbs us, the problem is not in the thing itself, but in our judgment about it. If someone says something that offends you, ask yourself, why does it affect me? Is it because deep down I fear it's true? You wake up every day without a real reason to move, without something that motivates you beyond routine. And that feeling of emptiness creates frustration. The lack of purpose turns people into irritable, reactive, always defensive beings. Any inconvenience, any obstacle feels bigger than it really is, because there's nothing bigger to focus on. You don't have to wait for life to hand it to you. You must create it yourself. Epictetus said that everyone has the responsibility to decide what they want to become, what they want to contribute to the world. It's not about waiting for inspiration, but about taking action, about seeking what truly makes us feel alive. Thanks to neuroplasticity, we can train it to respond differently to situations that previously provoked anger or frustration. If someone insults us, if something doesn't go as expected, if a person acts disrespectfully, the immediate reaction is the one we have reinforced over the years. But here's the key. If we consciously force ourselves to respond in a different way, we are creating a new neural pathway. We can redirect our impulses and make calmness our new normal. But if we are persistent, if every time we feel anger rising we force ourselves to stop, breathe, and respond differently, we will see a real change. One day we will realize that situations that would have made us explode before now seem insignificant. And not because we are repressing anger, but because our brain identified that there is no reason to feel it. If we feed anger, it grows and strengthens. Anger is a habit, just as calmness is. But if we ignore it and instead cultivate serenity, it eventually weakens and disappears. It's not about faking it, but about retraining our mind to function in a way that benefits us, instead of harming us. If we want to be calmer, more balanced, wiser in our responses, we have to practice it day after day. And with repetition, the time will come when calmness will not be an effort, but simply who we are. Every time we decide not to react with anger, we strengthen the neural connection of patience and equanimity. And the more we do it, the more natural it becomes. Marcus Aurelius said that we cannot control what happens, but we can control our reaction to it. And that is not just a philosophical principle, it is a scientific reality. The brain changes based on what we practice, and if we practice serenity, eventually it will be our default response. At first it feels forced, uncomfortable, even false. But with repetition, the brain begins to accept that response as normal. And eventually calmness becomes our automatic reaction. The idea that we are simply that way and cannot change is a lie we tell ourselves. My usual reaction would have been to get angry, raise my voice, feel that internal explosion of frustration. But at that moment, I decided to do something different. Instead of giving in to anger, I forced myself to take a deep breath and pet my dog. It was exhausting. I felt like I was repressing my emotion. But in reality, what I was doing was teaching my brain that not everything has to be an angry response. I repeated it again and again every time my dog did something that would normally irritate me. And over time, I noticed that my natural response changed. I no longer felt that tension in my chest. I no longer needed to restrain myself because my brain had learned that these situations were not a threat, that they did not require anger as a response. The brain is malleable and, like a muscle, can strengthen in certain areas depending on how we train it. If every time something irritates us, we respond with anger, we are reinforcing that neural connection, making anger an automatic reaction. But if instead we learn to respond with calmness, over time that will be our brain's new programming. When you discover your purpose and work on it, your mind changes. Frustration decreases because you no longer worry so much about what you cannot control. You don't need external validation. You don't need to prove anything to anyone. You simply do what you know you should do, and that fills you with satisfaction. Without direction, the mind fills with noise and disorder. And in that state, it's easy to fall into anger and resentment. You no longer react with anger to every obstacle, because you understand that challenges are part of the path. Every day has meaning. Every action contributes to something bigger. And when that happens, peace becomes a natural state. Not because everything is perfect, but because you have decided where to focus your energy. There's no room for anger when you're busy building something that truly matters. If you feel that life frustrates you, if you realize that you react with anger to Lee, ask yourself if you really have a clear purpose. Ask yourself if you are dedicating your time to something that fulfills you, or if you are simply going through the days without direction. The difference between a life full of frustration and a life full of meaning lies in that answer. Find what motivates you, what makes you get up every morning, eager to move forward, and when you do, you will see how anger loses its power over you. Because when you have a purpose, everything else becomes background noise. The Stoics understood that the key to mental peace is to have a purpose aligned with our values. Something that makes us feel that our existence has meaning. Is it because I have doubts about myself? Most of the time, the answer is yes. Anger is a defensive reaction to insecurity. You get annoyed by traffic, irritated by others' words, you feel that life is unfair. But when you have a purpose, those same things lose importance. Not because they cease to exist, but because your focus is on something greater. Marcus Aurelius said that everyone should ask themselves, what am I here for? What truly matters in my life? Because when you have clarity in that answer, small frustrations stop controlling you. You don't waste time reacting to every provocation because your energy is concentrated on something significant. When we improve our self-esteem, anger loses its power over us. I felt trapped in a meaningless routine, doing things that didn't fulfill me. And the consequence of that was constant irritability. Anything bothered me. Any problem seemed huge because I had no real reason to get up every morning. I lived on autopilot, letting circumstances dictate my mood. But when I found my purpose, everything changed. I decided to focus on creating content, on sharing ideas that could help others, on building something that made sense to me. And when I did, I realized that the problems that once seemed unbearable were now simply part of the journey. I no longer got irritated by small things because I had a bigger vision. Anger ceased to be a habitual reaction because there was something more valuable to concentrate on. We become less reactive, more serene, more focused on what really matters. We don't need to prove anything to anyone because we already know who we are. The opinion of others ceases to be a threat because our value does not depend on their approval. I didn't like what I saw in the mirror, and any external observation confirmed it. Anger is a sign that something within us is still unresolved. Instead of reacting impulsively, we can use those moments as signals of what we still need to work on. Every time you feel anger from a comment or a situation, pause for a moment. Ask yourself if it is really the comment that bothers you or if there is something deeper behind it. Use anger as a mirror to see what aspects of yourself you still need to work on. When you manage to improve your self-esteem, when you take responsibility for your life, anger ceases to be necessary. There is no insecurity to protect, no fear to hide, only the calm of someone who knows themselves, accepts themselves, and doesn't need to react to what doesn't define them. It wasn't their opinion that hurt me, but my own. The anger didn't come from them. It came from the insecurity I felt. Over time, I understood that the problem wasn't the people, but my lack of self. Instead of wasting energy reacting with anger, I decided to take action. I worked on my health, my discipline, my mindset, and when I did, the same comments that used to anger me stopped affecting me. Not because they had changed, but because I had changed. Therefore, not reacting immediately allows us to gain perspective. It gives us the opportunity to see the situation clearly before deciding what to do. When we are not at peace with ourselves, any comment, any look, any situation that challenges our self-image irritates us. It is not the situation itself that infuriates us, but what it awakens within us. If someone criticizes us and that makes us angry, the problem is not in the criticism, but in the importance we give it. If we were sure of who we are, if our self-esteem was strong, we wouldn't need to react with anger. We would simply ignore the comment. But when our confidence is fragile, any blow shakes our foundations, and we respond with anger as a defense mechanism. Practicing non-reaction does not mean accepting everything in silence or letting others walk all over us. It means acting from reason, not from emotion. The mind interprets these situations as personal attacks and responds with aggression. But the reality is that no one has the power to make us feel less if we do want to give them permission. Epictetus said that what others say about us does not affect us, but our opinion about those words does. If we believe we are weak, that we are not good enough, any criticism will reinforce it, and the immediate reaction will be anger. On the other hand, if we have a solid self-image, nothing external can disturb us. If something truly deserves a response, the best response will be the one we give when our mind is calm. Instead of responding to fire with more fire, we respond with intelligence, with equanimity, not because we are weak, but because we understand that our peace is worth more than a meaningless argument. The practice of non-reaction allows us to avoid this, gives us control over our responses, and protects us from the emotional exhaustion generated by impulsive reactions. When we take a moment before responding, when we resist the impulse to act immediately, we gain power over ourselves. It's not about being indifferent or repressing our emotions, but about training ourselves not to be slaves to them. Marcus Aurelius said that the best way to defend oneself against an offense is not to resemble the one who offended us. If someone insults you, if someone criticizes you harshly, reacting with anger is falling into their game. It's allowing them to have power over you. If someone criticizes you in a meeting and you take it as a personal attack, you get angry and react defensively. Most people act on impulse, enslaved by their emotions. But if instead you take a moment, breathe, and analyze if it's really worth responding, you can act with calm and professionalism without allowing emotion to control your behavior. Non-reaction is a sign of strength. When someone irritates them, they react without thinking, letting anger take control. But true power lies in those who are able to resist that initial reaction, in those who know they don't need to prove anything, in those who choose when and how to act. But if you remain calm, if you choose not to respond in the moment, you demonstrate that you have control, that your peace does not depend on the attitude of others. In everyday life, opportunities to practice non-reaction are constant. A coworker who makes a hurtful comment, an aggressive driver in traffic, a family member who seeks an argument. In each of those moments, the decision is in your hands. You can react immediately and fuel the conflict, or you can take a breather, observe the situation from a distance, and respond with intelligence. Epictetus taught that it is not what happens that affects us, but the way we interpret it. Seneca reminded us that time is a great filter for emotions. Every time you feel the urge to react, remember that you can choose not to. 6. The relationship between low self-esteem and anger. Every comment about my appearance made me react with anger. We believe that others are constantly judging us. Anger, many times, is nothing more than a reflection of insecurity. Insecurity creates a perception of vulnerability. We feel that we must constantly protect our image, that others judge us, that any negative comment is a threat. I remember a time when I had gained weight. Low self-esteem makes us interpret reality in a distorted way. The Stoics teach us that true strength is not in imposing our will on others, but in governing ourselves. 7. The importance of living with purpose. When you don't have a clear purpose, life feels empty, chaotic, without direction. When you live without a defined purpose, everything becomes a distraction. There was a time in my life when I had no direction. The Stoics teach us that purpose is not something you find, but something you define. When you live with purpose, life stops feeling like a series of problems and starts to look like an opportunity. 8. Using neuroplasticity to reprogram your emotional response. The brain is not fixed in a single way of reacting. When we face a situation that would normally make us explode, our instinct is to follow the pattern. I remember a time when my dog destroyed an object that mattered to me. Neuroplasticity shows us that we are not condemned to be prisoners of our emotions. This process is not immediate. At first, the mind will try to revert to old patterns because it's what it knows, what's familiar. 10. Establishing healthy boundaries. If you don't set boundaries, you allow others to decide how to treat you. It's not about being confrontational or rejecting others, but about defining the limits of your patience, your time, and your energy. When you do unset clear boundaries, you send the message that it's okay for people to disrespect you no matter what I was doing. If someone wanted my attention, I dropped everything and responded. Epictetus said that we must decide what things are under our control and what are not. We cannot prevent someone from trying to overstep our boundaries, but we can decide how we react. If every time someone treats you badly you allow it in silence, you are not being virtuous. You are abandoning your responsibility to protect your well-being. Saying no is an act of courage, not because it's easy, but because it shows that you know and respect yourself. Most of the time, the answer will be no. Is it really worth investing your energy in that argument? A comment doesn't define your worth. A criticism doesn't change who you are. If someone acts with malice, if someone tries to provoke you, remember that you have the option not to respond. Strength is not in winning every battle, but in wisely choosing which battles are worthwhile. We live trapped in interpretations, in stories we tell ourselves and about others. But most of these stories are not facts. They are just beliefs we have accepted without question, and those beliefs can be the biggest obstacle to our peace of mind. The Stoics teach us that the key to tranquility is to learn to differentiate between what is a fact and what is just our perception of that fact. Not because there was proof of it, but because at some point in my life someone made me feel that way, and I decided to accept it as truth. Every time I faced a challenge, that belief returned. You can't do it, you're not capable. But one day I decided to question it. Where was the real proof that I was incapable? Hadn't I learned many things in my life? Hadn't I overcome difficulties before? From childhood, we absorb opinions, labels, judgments that we don't even question. But how much of that is really true? If someone tells us we are shy, we accept it. If they call us failures, we believe it. How much of our identity is built on ideas we never analyzed? It is simply recognizing your worth without depending on external factors. When you accept who you are, with your strengths and weaknesses, with your successes and mistakes, you free yourself from the fear of judgment. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to demonstrate your worth because you already have it. And the most powerful thing is that when you stop seeking approval, you become more authentic. The people who really matter respect you for who you are, not for who you try to be. True emotional freedom comes when you stop living for others and start living for your truth. It does not mean ignoring all external opinion, but learning to filter what truly deserves your attention and what does not. If you know yourself, if you have clarity about your values and your purpose, criticism ceases to be a threat. You live with confidence, with tranquility, without the need to impress anyone. Not because you are perfect, but because you no longer need the world to validate your existence. And in that state of clarity, you find the peace that has always been there waiting to be discovered. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that we must ask ourselves if what we believe about ourselves is true or just a story we tell ourselves. The key lies in self-knowledge, in observing ourselves without filters, without illusions, not out of self-indulgence, but out of honesty. Accepting our strengths and also our weaknesses. I realized that this belief was not a fact. It was just a story I was telling myself. And by understanding it, I began to let it go. But what if instead you stop and reflect? If someone says you are selfish, instead of reacting with anger, you could ask yourself, is this true? Do I really act this way? If the answer is yes, then you have an opportunity to improve. If the answer is no, then the criticism has no weight, and you can let it go without it affecting you. Epictetus taught that we should not be concerned with what others say about us, but whether what they say is true. It is not the criticism that harms us, but our interpretation of it. If your self-image is strong, the words of others lose power. It wasn't immediate, but with each thought I challenged, I regained control. I tried to fit in, to be accepted, to meet external expectations. But all of that took me away from who I really was. I didn't make decisions based on what I wanted, but on what I thought I should do to be approved. And that kept me in a constant struggle because it was never enough. There was always someone with a different opinion, always something to change to please another. It was when I understood that I could never control what others thought of me that everything changed. I stopped trying to fit in and started asking myself, who am I really? What do I want for myself? And in that process, the need for validation began to fade. When you filter what truly matters, you discover that many of your worries dissolve. They did not accept any emotion or idea without first analyzing it. Marcus Aurelius advised us to ask ourselves before any negative thought, is this true? If you live through the eyes of the world, you will be a prisoner of its approval. One day they praise you and you feel invincible, but the next day they criticize you and you crumble. That instability is the result of building your worth on external foundations, on something you cannot control. But when your perception of yourself comes from self-knowledge and acceptance, no one can take away your peace. The Stoics understood that true strength comes from looking inward, from defining who you are without expecting external validation. Only when you stop depending on what others think can you begin to live with true freedom. Is it really as terrible as I think? Most of the time, the answer was no. We are not as limited as we think. We are not the labels that have been put on us. We do not have to be slaves to beliefs that hold us back, but to free ourselves from them, we must first recognize that they are not absolute facts. Every time you feel that a belief about yourself limits you, question it. Ask if it is really true, or if you have simply accepted it without proof. If you can replace it with a more realistic version, you will have taken a huge step towards emotional freedom. Separating facts from beliefs is the way to stop being prisoners of our minds. It is how we regain control, how we stop reacting automatically and begin to live with true clarity. When we learn to see reality without the distortions of our beliefs, we find the peace that has always been there waiting to be discovered. The energy you once spent on useless arguments can now be used to build, to learn, to improve. If someone criticizes us, we can see it as an opportunity to improve or as a personal attack. The difference between both responses is not in the facts, but in our beliefs. The human mind is expert at creating stories. We tell ourselves that we are not good enough, that we don't deserve certain things, that we can never change. And the worst thing is that we believe these stories as if they were irrefutable facts. But where do they really come from? Often from past experiences, from other people's words, from mistakes we made at some point that we have turned into permanent labels. If one day we fail at something, we tell ourselves, I am a failure. If someone rejected us, we believe we are unworthy of love. But none of these thoughts are facts. They are just interpretations, beliefs that we have strengthened over time without realizing that we can change them. You cannot prevent people from criticizing. You cannot control what others say or do, but you can decide if it's worth letting that affect your mental state. In the end, true freedom is not doing what you want, but not being dominated by what doesn't matter. If every time someone says something negative about you, you react, you are handing over your peace to anyone who decides to provoke you. Epictetus taught us that we should not be slaves to others' opinions. If something doesn't contribute to your growth, if it doesn't change the course of your life, then it doesn't deserve your attention. We react with anger, with sadness, with fear, without realizing that we are reacting to something that is not real. If someone tells us we are useless, it is not the comment itself that hurts us, but our decision to believe it. The objective fact is that someone uttered some words, but our mind turns those words into an absolute truth. Maybe they're right. What if I really am like that? And suddenly a simple opinion becomes a burden we carry for years. We don't stop to question if it's true. We simply absorb it. Most of the worries we carry are not ours. We stress about what others think, about problems we cannot control, about expectations that don't even belong to us. We spend too much time worrying about what people will say, about others' approval, about situations that, deep down, don't affect our essence. But when you understand that your energy is limited, you start to be more selective about what you give importance to. It doesn't mean being indifferent, but knowing how to differentiate between what truly deserves your effort and what is just noise. However, we get carried away by the emotion of the moment. We feel the need to respond, to defend ourselves, to react. But if we observe from the perspective of life as a whole, we realize that many things are just distractions. Marcus Aurelius said that tranquility comes when we learn to ignore what does not concern us. If someone insults you on the street, does it really change anything in your life? If a stranger on social media criticizes you, does that have any real impact on who you are? Spending energy on every small provocation only distances us from what truly matters. Setting boundaries doesn't mean pushing people away. On the contrary, it means creating healthier relationships where both sides know what to expect and what is acceptable. Many times, people don't even realize they're crossing a boundary until someone points it out to them. If someone questioned what I was doing, I felt the need to explain myself, to justify myself, to prove I was right. But over time, I understood that was a waste of energy. I learned to observe before reacting, to ask myself if it was really worth it. And most of the time, the best response was silence. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because it simply wasn't necessary. Not everything requires a response. Not everything deserves a conflict. Not everything deserves our attention. Every time you decide to ignore what is not relevant, you are protecting your mental peace. You are training your mind to focus on what truly adds value, on what truly transforms. You can't expect others to guess what bothers you. You must communicate it. And if even after that they still don't respect it, then you have to ask yourself if you really want that person to remain in your life. At first I thought that made me a good person. but over time I realized that I was only allowing others to prioritize their needs over mine. You are choosing your discomfort in order to avoid a difficult conversation, but the reality is that avoiding the problem doesn't solve it. Learning to say no without guilt is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. But the reality is that most of those things are not truly important. We exhaust ourselves emotionally reacting to the trivial, to what will be irrelevant tomorrow. We live in a world where everyone has an opinion, where criticism is constant, where minor problems can seem big if we don't learn to filter what truly matters. The key to maintaining peace of mind is to understand that not everything that happens around us deserves our energy, because it makes you stronger in front of others, but because it makes you stronger within yourself. Setting boundaries is not about controlling others, it's about protecting your peace and living with dignity. I felt frustrated, exhausted, but it wasn't others' fault. I never set a boundary. One day I decided to change it. When someone interrupted me, I simply said, "I'm busy now. Let's talk later." At first it was hard, but little by little others understood that my time is also important. And the most surprising thing was that I didn't lose any important relationships. In fact, I started to feel more respected. Only you can decide what you allow and what you don't. Constantly interrupt you or not value your time, and when this happens, frustration grows, anger accumulates, and you end up emotionally exhausted. But the responsibility for setting those limits isn't others, it's yours. Many times we allow certain behaviors for fear of appearing selfish or unpleasant. We find it hard to say no because we fear the other person will be offended or reject us. But the real problem isn't saying no but not saying it when necessary. If someone constantly interrupts you at work, if a friend only seeks you out when they need something, if a family member criticizes you without reason, is it really your responsibility to accept that? Seneca said that we cannot control how others act, but we can control how we position ourselves in front of them. If we allow ourselves to be treated inappropriately without reacting, we are giving permission for it to continue. When someone crosses a boundary and we don't stop them, what we're doing is reinforcing that behavior. If someone criticizes you unfairly and you say nothing, that person will assume it's normal to treat you that way. But if you calmly and firmly state that you don't accept that type of treatment, you are sending a clear message. You value yourself enough not to allow disrespect. You don't need to be aggressive or argue. You just need to be clear. I will not tolerate these types of comments. My time is valuable. Please respect it. I don't feel comfortable with this. These simple phrases can completely change the dynamic of a relationship. I remember a time when I allowed myself to be constantly interrupted. The Stoics understood that setting boundaries is not an act of rejection, but every time you choose not to set a boundary for fear of conflict, you are choosing internal conflict over external conflict. The immediate impulse is to respond, defend yourself, prove you're right. But what do you gain from that? 11. Not everything deserves your attention. Not everything deserves your attention. Every day we face provocations, unnecessary comments, insignificant problems that try to drag us into chaos. Every time something bothers you, pause for a moment and ask yourself, will this really matter in a month? A year? Will I even remember it? Imagine someone makes a rude comment about you. I remember a time when any criticism affected me. The Stoics did not seek to control the world, but to control their response to it. 12. The importance of separating facts from beliefs. Many times we suffer not because of what actually happens, but because of what we believe it means. When we don't distinguish, we get entangled in unnecessary emotions. Epictetus warned us about this. He reminded us that it is not events that affect us but the interpretation we make of them. I remember a time when I believed I wasn't smart enough to achieve certain things. The Stoics practiced the ability to examine their own thoughts and filter what truly deserved attention. 13. Developing a healthy self-image. Your self-image cannot depend on the opinions of others. The problem arises when our self-image is formed based on imposed beliefs. When someone criticizes you, the automatic reaction is to defend yourself, feel hurt, or try to prove the opposite. For years I worried too much about how others saw me. It is not resigning yourself to being as you are without seeking to improve. 14. The fallacy of good and bad. No one is entirely good or entirely bad. We are all a mix of successes and mistakes, of moments of lucidity and moments of weakness. But the human mind tends to simplify, to label, to classify others as good or bad according to what suits us or according to our experience with them. However, this way of thinking is a fallacy, a distortion of reality that prevents us from understanding the complexity of human beings. When we see someone only through a label, we stop seeing them as they truly are. An individual can be kind to their family and ruthless in business. They can be generous with their friends and cold with strangers. But these contradictions do not mean they are a bad person. Rather, it means they are human. All of us at some point have acted in ways we are not proud of. But if you learn to manage it intelligently, it becomes a tool for growth instead of a weapon of destruction. Don't deny it, don't repress it, but realize that it's there. Many times, when we get angry, we react without thinking, as if we were on autopilot. Here is where, instead of punishing yourself for feeling anger, you practice self-compassion. By doing so, you reaffirm your commitment to live with more reason, calm, and discipline. Don't let emotions control you. Take charge of your life. See you in the next video. Keep growing and keep mastering your mind. It doesn't mean justifying anger, but recognizing that there is a part of you that needs to be attended to. Perhaps you have been repressing certain emotions. Perhaps there is a limiting belief that makes you react in a certain way. Or perhaps you simply need to give yourself more space to process what you feel. Marcus Aurelius said that we should treat ourselves with the same patience and understanding that we offer to others. You cannot eliminate anger completely, but you can learn to respond with wisdom instead of impulse. As you practice this process, you will notice that anger loses power over you. It doesn't mean you will never get angry again, but that when you do, you will know exactly how to handle it without it destroying your peace or affecting your relationships. You will learn that anger is just a fleeting emotion, not a command you must obey. Instead of acting from reaction, you will act from reflection, and in that space of awareness, you will find true emotional freedom. We get carried away by the emotion without even realizing what is really happening inside us. But if, the moment anger appears, you pause and say, "I am feeling anger right now," you immediately create a separation between the emotion and yourself. Marcus Aurelius spoke of the importance of observing our emotions as if they were external phenomena without fully identifying with them. If you can see anger as something fleeting, as a reaction that arises but does not define who you are, you have already taken the first step to manage it. The RIN process is a technique that helps you manage anger effectively without suppressing it or acting impulsively. Instead of getting trapped in superficial anger, ask yourself, where does it really come from? Many times, anger is just a symptom of something deeper. It can be fear, insecurity, unmet expectations, or past wounds that we have not yet healed. Epictetus taught that it is not external events that bother us, but our interpretations of them. If someone interrupts you in a conversation and that makes you angry, perhaps it is not just the interruption that bothers you, but a deeper belief that you are not respected or valued. If you can get to the root of the problem, anger loses its intensity because you understand that what you are feeling has more to do with you than with the external situation. It is a method based on mindfulness and something the Stoics already applied in their daily lives without giving it a specific name. Through RIN, we can observe our anger without being carried away by it, understanding its origin and transforming its energy into something positive. We have all made mistakes, said hurtful words, made impulsive decisions. If we judge others harshly, we should apply the same criteria to ourselves. And if we want to be understood for our moments of weakness, why not do the same for others? A person's actions can be fair or unfair, generous or selfish, but reducing someone to a single category prevents us from understanding them. We no longer react with as much frustration to others' failures because we understand that everyone is in their own learning process. We become more patient, It does not mean tolerating abuse or accepting injustices, but learning to respond with wisdom instead of reacting with anger. Marcus Aurelius said that when someone acts badly, we should ask ourselves if we really expected them to act otherwise. People act as they can, according to what they have learned, according to what their mind allows them to see. If we expect perfection from others, we will be constantly disappointed. Freeing ourselves from this mindset helps us find inner peace. We don't feel the need to punish, to react with resentment, to divide the world into allies and enemies. We become more objective, more serene, more capable of handling conflicts with clarity. True strength is not in judging others harshly, but in understanding that we are all on the same journey, at different stages, but with the same destination. To learn and improve, when you understand this, you stop wearing yourself out with others' behavior and focus on the only thing you can truly control. We think they are unfair, cruel, that they deserve punishment. But do we ever stop to ask ourselves what led them to act that way? Not to justify their behavior, but to understand that no one is born evil, that we are all the result of our experiences and decisions. Epictetus taught us that we should not judge people only by their actions, but understand that each person acts according to their level of knowledge and understanding. If someone is disrespectful, perhaps it is because they have never known another way to relate. If someone betrays, perhaps it is because they have lived with fear their whole life. It does not mean accepting the harm, but understanding that it is not always personal, that often others act from their own confusion, not from a conscious desire to do evil. An individual who acts cruelly today may be the same person who shows compassion tomorrow. A man who has made mistakes can also do good. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that we should see others for what they are, fallible human beings, conditioned by their history, their fears, their experiences. No one is just one thing. No one is completely defined by their best or worst moments. And when we understand this, we free ourselves from judgment and the emotional burden that comes with it. When someone treats us badly, our instinct is to label them as a bad person. In society, people react according to their environment and circumstances. When we stop labeling people as good or bad, our relationships improve. 15. The RIN process for managing anger. Anger is a powerful emotion, but it doesn't have to control you. It can seem like an uncontrollable fire that consumes you in the moment. The first step is to recognize that anger is happening. The second step is to investigate the origin of the anger. The last step is to nourish the inner part that needs healing. If this message resonated with you, go to the comments and write, Today my best version begins. I am Stoic.